Welcome back to the Sudplementary Podcast, where we dive into all things Copa Sudamericana here on Wilson and Windsor. I keep wanting to say Wilson and Windsor Libertadores, and we're just not Libertadores, are we? I'm glad to say that David Windsor is joining me to dive into a bit of all things Copa Sudamericana as we kicked off the first round of the new look format in the Copa Libertadores' sister tournament this week. Did you catch any of the action this week, David Windsor?
I was just about to say, Ollie, that if I'd said, when you said, I'm glad David Windsor's joining, I would have been the biggest football hipster snob if, considering we just did a Copa Libertadores podcast, if I ducked out then straight away with the audio still recording and us both on Zoom ahead of the Sudamericana, it would make me a football hipster and a football snob in the same sequence. Did I watch it? I saw some flashes, Ollie, but I didn't watch the Copa Sudamericana because I always defer to your superior knowledge on this. I watched the podcast you created teeing up the tournament, and there were so many numbers there that I've got a million questions about the structure of the tournament, actually, Ollie, but we can come to that in due course if you want.
No, let's dive into the structure, because we are still building the brand new structure of the Copa Sudamericana.
Sure. I had this big question, and for those of you who haven't watched it or listened to it, do go back and check, Ollie. I think it's like 6 or 7 minutes, isn't it? It's very bite-sized. Ollie kind of breaking down exactly how the tournament is set up. Ollie, you did so well of explaining the new changes, but at the same time, it is quite confusing how it is all set up. I have one big question. Right now, we're not at the group stages of the Copa Sudamericana.
No.
When we do get to the group stages, there's 32 teams.
Yeah.
Fine. There's but only one team from each group qualifies for the last 16.
That's correct, yeah.
Right. So, and then the other 8 sides drop down from the Copa Libertadores.
The third place sides from each group,
Sure.
the 8 groups in the Copa Libertadores go into the knockout stage, yeah.
My issue is this. That's a lot of dead rubbers in the group stages.
That is exactly what they're saying about the new look Champions League as well, David Windsor, in European football when that comes in 2024. It is leaving us potentially with a lot of games that may not mean too much. The even bigger worry, if you want to go broader scope with it, is by the quarterfinals, that whole group stage could be completely irrelevant if there's only teams left from the Copa Libertadores in the competition.
That's fascinating.
It's an interesting one, isn't it?
That's really, really interesting. So you'll have 8 teams dropping down from the Copa Libertadores. You'll have the 8 teams that won the group stages, and there's the possibility of having an entire quarterfinal lineup of sides that drop down from the Libertadores. So everything previous in the Sudamericana was futile. Well, we'll cross that. We'll cross that bridge. Ollie, you love football.
I enjoy the game.
Yeah. So when you did the maths to figure out there will be 157, that's 157 games played in the Sudamericana this year. Some people would think that's too much football, but you presumably thought, get in.
I thought get in. I also thought, though, at this stage of the tournament, we have a lot of football with a lot of teams that a lot of people won't hear about again, potentially. This is the interesting thing about how it's set up, because we're already trimming the fat from the, not to be critical of them, but lesser nations, the nations outside of Brazil and Argentina. We are already cutting out potential dead wood from Venezuela, Peru, Chile, etc. in this first stage before we get to the group stage, which in theory means we're going to have the creme de la creme from those nations then in the group stage joining the not elite clubs, obviously, because they've been there in the Copa Libertadores, but the next level down from Brazil and Argentina. And there are some big sides, as I mentioned, going into that group stage from there. But it does mean that there are a lot of games right now which maybe doesn't attract the attention of a European football fan unless they're already invested in the CONMEBOL Sudamericana, which is why I completely understand why people might not have caught the first legs of the first round this week. What I will say is they missed some entertainment. But, you know, some of us are dedicated and tried to stay and watch some of them. So.
I did also think, Ollie, I sort of scribbled down, domestic tournament before an international competition? Question mark. And I thought, is that strange? Then it's not really, is it? Because that's quite standard in football. And even if you think about something like the Champions League, essentially that is an international continental competition, and prior to that is a bunch of domestic matches.
Well, and
to determine who gets there.
The Copa Libertadores in some of its earlier formats used to have a very similar round of knockout games before we got to the deeper stages of when it was just a knockout tournament. You would have just teams playing against other teams from the same nation. It also makes it quite interesting because you can potentially get some good little rivalries thrown up or some teams that know each other really well, but perhaps it goes better for one team on the continental stage than it does for another. I mean, Macara against Emelec, they've met, I think, 34 times. Emelec have won 21 games domestically. Macara get a 2-2 draw this week, though, with the last-minute equaliser. So it kind of adds a nice narrative that can be then thrown into turmoil, which makes the Copa Sudamericana fixtures then very interesting because it goes against the grain. So, yeah, it's sometimes when teams from the same nation play each other in a tournament, it can seem stale because they know each other very well. I just don't think you get that necessarily because you are playing 2 games to try and get into the important stages of this tournament. So it's still very important for these sides to go out and play well.
Yeah, I think you said on the pod where you teed up that 13 of the 19 years the trophy's been won by an Argentine or Brazilian side. I think something like that you said in the history of the Copa Sudamericana. So,
which is still more than the Libertadores in that spell. But yeah, it's not by much. The Libertadores has only had 4 different winners in that time. The Copa Sudamericana has had 6 different winners. But the final is rarely...
You still see that dominance though diluted down to the kind of second competition in South America.
And you would expect it to continue with 12 teams in total from Brazil and Argentina going into the group stage of 32 teams, which leaves just 20 teams. And potentially more, obviously, if Santos and Gremio go down, that's then 14 from Brazil and Argentina will be going into the group stage, making up almost half of the group stage as well. So, yeah, it could be very tipped in the favour of the big 2 sides.
I just keep thinking 157 games of football. Ollie, for someone that's kind of not as entrenched in the tournament, from this round of fixtures, give me a kind of takeaway, a story, a big result that caught your imagination this week.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that have caught my eye. In the plethora of games, 14 games that were played this week, and there still should have been 2 more with the Uruguayans starting after the international break because of the way their season has been affected by COVID-19. But I want to talk to you today quickly, Windsor, about young teams, underage teams that you wouldn't expect in their infancy to already be playing on the continental stage. Just out of interest, how many teams do you think that were formed after the year 2000 are playing in the CONMEBOL Sudamericana this year?
Out of how many sides?
Out of 28 teams that played this week.
Okay. How many sides were formed after the year 2000?
Yeah, founded after the year 2000.
Jesus, so just a couple of decades old. And it's funny because you always see South America. When I first thought South American football, you think history, don't you?
Yeah.
You think, wow, like history of those football clubs. I'll be 28 teams. I mean, it can't be many, Ollie. I mean, 20 years is not long for a football club to be founded, created, and be competing. Let's go with 5.
Okay, it's more than 5, but you're close. But it's still, to me, I think this is quite a large number. 7 teams
it's a lot.
Before the year 2000. And the youngest of them was founded in 2007. So the very youngest side comes from Paraguay, Guarenia, founded in 2016 on March 28th. So it's not even 5 years old as a football club.
Also, a chunk of their history, probably 20% of that football club's history was COVID related, right? So they've probably played 20% of their football matches,
without
if not
fans.
more, with no fans.
Yeah.
So they're probably used to it.
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting. And Lucky Dad are only 38 years old. They're the next youngest side in the competition at the moment, the Colombians. So there's 3 from Venezuela, Metropolitanos, Puerto Cabello, and Aragua, who were formed in 2011, 2007. Sport Huancayo in 2008 from Peru. Guarenia, as I say, in 2016. Guayaquil City from Ecuador in 2007. And Atletico Palmaflor in 2008 from Bolivia. So we've got some real young teams that are out making history for themselves in this competition at the moment, and some of them are going to go through after the results this week.
That is a spectacular array of football clubs that I haven't heard of as well.
I know.
That's amazing.
Guayaquil City just sounds so much like the millennial football team. Oh, we're from Guayaquil. Oh, we similar to Man City. Yeah, forget it. Guayaquil City. We'll do that. Yeah, same as like New York City FC and things like that.
Sure. Maybe they're the next branch of the franchise.
Exactly. You got to find some roots to start stabilizing your youth policy in South America. The other one I wanted to bring to your attention this week was the drama. So we had 14 games this week. 6 of them, the results were decided by goals in the last 15 minutes.
Nice.
Either draws or victories were stolen in the last 15 minutes this week. So whether you know the teams or not, there's been a lot of action. I think we've had 4 sendings off this week, plethora of late goals to decide ties, and nobody is really through except for Deportes Tolima that took a 3-0 victory in their first leg, the Colombians against Deportivo Cali, and they were very good. And both of those sides are 2 sides that you would expect to go fairly deep in the Copa Sudamericana. Probably the best tie of the round. Macara against Emelec, another one. Emelec have got a lot of prowess in the continent. Held to a 2-2 draw, though, after Macara scored a late equaliser in the 89th minute. So, yeah, there's some tasty ties to keep an eye on going into the second legs, and the Uruguayans still to get involved as well.
Hearing you talk about some of these football clubs that are pretty niche, Ollie, coupled with the moustache that you're currently sporting, just tees up. It really does tee up the football mad hipster image beautifully. Okay, well, I'm learning something. I think it's good.
Well, if you want to learn more, Windsor, get on to watching the South American football. Get on to Will Win Pod on Twitter and on Instagram. Get on to @DavidTWindsor and start tweeting like you have done for the last few years, manically about all things South American football. And get on to O_J_Wilson to keep a track of the rest of the action as well. And we'll be back next time on another Supplementary Podcast.